Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Princeton, where in our open and loving community, we live our message of hope, love, justice, and joy. Whether you've joined us live here in Channing or are with us on Zoom this morning, it's wonderful to be together on this beautiful day. We extend a special welcome to our visitors this morning. We're so happy to welcome you here, and we invite you to stop by our newcomer table after the service if you haven't already, so that we can get you any information that you'd like about our congregation. Again, welcome one and all to UU Princeton this morning. We have a few announcements. The first is that we're grateful for our friends at the First Church of Christ Christian Scientist in Princeton for providing our flowers this morning. They used our space earlier in the week. They loved it and we're very grateful. And so they wanted to help out our worship this morning. So thank you, our friends over there. Also, the spring sale is only 2 weeks away. Receiving begins next Sunday, believe it or not, at 12:30. Many volunteers are needed to make the sale a success. Even if you only have a few hours to spare, there are lots of ways to help during setup week and of course on spring sale days, which are Friday and Saturday, May 5th and 6th. Special help is needed next Saturday at 11 a.m. We need several strong helpers to pull clothing racks and shelving from the crawl space and shed and begin setup in the lower lounge. So you can stop by the table in Robinson Lounge after the service for more information and to sign up. And the spring sale is a major outreach fundraiser that we do every year. Everything that we sell goes to outreach grants that help wonderful groups in our community. So please be a part of that if you can. Also, the young adults are meeting on Zoom this Thursday, April 27th at 7 p.m. You can email the church office for the Zoom link and we'll put you in touch with Emma, who happens to be right there. You could also just go talk to Emma or Jenna, who are coordinating that group. But if you don't remember that, just email the church office and we'll get you the link for that young adult meeting this Thursday at 7 p.m. on Zoom. After the service today, it's going to be a lot of fun. We have our intergenerational Earth Day gardening event and lunch. It will be right after the service. We'll go over the instructions just before the benediction, but it'll be outside, wonderful fresh air. The weather held out. It's a beautiful day. Join the community for this fun event after the service today. And now with mind and heart, may we celebrate and praise the one light that offers each sunbeam, the one breath that fills each body, the one fire that lights each spark, and the one sea to which all waters flow. Come as many and as one, let us worship together.
Flame of fire, spark of the universe that warmed our ancestral hearth, agent of life and death, symbol of truth and freedom. We strive to understand ourselves and our earthly home.
I invite you to close your eyes and take a few nice deep breaths. Settle into your chair. Enjoy the gift of just a few moments of peace and quietude. For the fresh morning air and another day of light and love. For friends and family who embrace us in laughter and care. For the food that brings us delight, and the voices that bring us joy, and the stories that make us wonder, and the songs best sung by many, and the work that takes all of us, and the play that invites each of us, and the peaceful night that awaits us, and for tomorrow's dawn of promise. For these and for all the gifts of life, we say to earth, to air, to fire, to water, and to spirit, thank you. And here in the silence, we offer these, the prayers and meditations of our hearts.
Good morning and happy Earth Day, a day late, and Earth Month, which isn't quite over yet. I recall the first Earth Day on April 22nd, 1970. It happened about the same time that I had to make some personal decisions that diverted me from becoming either a math geek or a physicist. I wound up becoming an environmental scientist who specialized in forest ecology, worked for the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, taught environmental education, and was always interested in how people related to the environment around them. Well, back in the late 1960s, there was a senator named Gaylord Nelson who represented Wisconsin in the US Senate. One thing he wanted to do was to raise the public's awareness about pollution and other environmental issues. So he envisioned organizing a nationwide environmental teaching. He envisioned organizing it throughout the country on April 22nd, 1970. He wound up hiring a former intern named Dennis Hayes to be the national coordinator of that first Earth Day environmental teaching. It was a couple of years before they changed the name from environmental teaching to Earth Day. There were so many communities around the country interested in having an environmental teaching, and he needed to hire 85 people to help those communities so there would be some coherence throughout the country. Here in New Jersey, the Department of Environmental Protection was created on that date. New Jersey was the fourth state to create a department focused on environmental protection. In July of 1970, the Environmental Protection Agency was established at the national level in order to regulate and enforce pollution laws. Those early Earth Days were inspired by the passing of national legislation such as the Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act, National Environmental Education Act, and much more. Every April 22nd since then has been devoted to teaching about the environment. Earth Day is now celebrated in countries around the world. Environmental teachings have become so popular that Earth Day was expanded to Earth Week. And now April has become known as Earth Month. And I'm glad to say I've been involved with environmental education activities every April since 1970. I have my dad to thank for the direction my life has taken since that first Earth Day. He enjoyed being outdoors and encouraged my interest in trees and gardening, camping, and being active in both Boy Scouts and 4-H. We didn't have a lot of money. He referred to our lifestyle as frugal comfort. But we were fortunate in many ways to be able to live in the house in which he was born. That was in Bloomfield, New Jersey, an older suburb of Newark. And fortunately, as an older community, the houses were sort of close together along the street, but everybody had side yards as well. And I could walk down the street and sell Boy Scout candy and other things, not be afraid of being hurt. And I got to know all my neighbors for at least a block in every direction. I thought that was pretty neat, and I thought that was standard, but I've since learned it's not quite. We didn't have a car and didn't need one. Every place we needed to go on a regular basis, stores, public library, public schools I attended, where my dad worked, were all within walking distance. My dad often took me to New York City, either by bus or by train into Hoboken, and then by ferry to Lower Manhattan, and that was fun. Then we would go to the American Museum of Natural History, to art museums, Central Park, and viewing the city from the top of the Empire State Building. He enabled me to experience many other delightful things that only a big city can provide. The other thing he did, which I didn't plan to include, but I couldn't avoid, was Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. Soon after it was published, he brought home a copy from the library and encouraged me to read it. Little did I know then how important it would be as my life evolved. It was not until my sophomore year in college that I began to realize that all the experiences and informal education my father had provided, he meant that I needed to shift direction away from being indoors studying math and physics. Rather than crunching numbers, I realized I wanted to make a living spending time out of doors. And I wanted to pursue my interests in photography and doing creative things, but I was not sure where to go or what to do. Two events in spring of 1970 showed me a new way. On April 22nd, the first Earth Day happened. Less than 2 weeks later, on the Kent State campus in Ohio, members of the National Guard shot at a group of unarmed students, killing 4 and wounding 9. I hate to end my talk on such a sad note, but I've said enough for today. Thank you.
Ray has long been a leader in UU Princeton's various environmental Earth ministries, and I'm so grateful to Ray for being the guest worship associate today on Earth Day Sunday. Ray also presented at the program council meeting yesterday morning, and on the agenda, I wrote Earth Day-Ray, and someone said that's just how he should be known now, Earth Day Ray, just one after the other. Not long ago, a peaceful early morning jaunt through the woods was marred by an unearthly sound. Not a human sound, but a little too close to one. Clearly an animal sound, and clearly close to me, and clearly signaling that I should move along very quickly. It was part cry, part shout, part declaration, very sudden, very loud, and very startling. This was pre-dawn in Mercer County Park, where I frequently gasp and wheeze my way down a paved trail or two, running early to get it in before the day really begins. I'm usually alone, crossing paths only occasionally with other people, and sometimes their dogs who are out doing the same thing. There's a knowing nod, a neighborly good morning, and that's it. It's often very quiet, which is my preference, and I run tech-free, no music or podcasts, so that it stays that way. Typically, that means I can hear the wind rustling through the leaves and raindrops hitting the ground when it's wet outside. I can hear animals moving about in the weeds and brush off to the side of the road or trail. I can definitely hear my feet clomping along, the splash of puddles, the squish of mud when I get distracted and go off the path. It's peaceful and lovely. Except when what is heard in the midst of this beauty is part cry, part shriek, and way too close, and it's still dark out. I thought an animal was meeting its end at the claws of another animal, and I wanted no part of it. I love nature, but I don't need to see it all, and that part of the interconnected web can stay far away from me, and I'll be just fine. When the cry rang out in the otherwise still early morning, I literally jumped up, and then for some reason kind of crouched down, and then thought that the best thing to do was what I had been doing and just keep running as fast as I can. I'm not a fast runner, although I can run for a long time, but I was a bona fide sprinter for a brief stretch that morning. I flew along that path doing my best Usain Bolt impression, trying to get out of the wooded part and back toward the road as quickly as I could. I've mentioned before that I say good morning to the animals that I see out early, usually deer and rabbits and foxes. For the past week or so, I've seen what I'm sure are the same 2 Canadian geese out in one of the fields, always together, always just the 2 of them. I name all paired Canadian geese that I see after 2 beloved family members who are also in my mind always together. And so when I see any pair in the morning, I greet them with, "Good morning, Aunt Becky and Uncle Hank." These geese are far less interested in me than the real Aunt Becky and Uncle Hank, but I greet them anyway, as I do all the animals that I can see. That morning, however, when I heard that frightening sound in the woods, I sped off without offering a greeting at all. I just hightailed it out of there and hoped for the best. Recounting this story later that day to Shannon, my wife, she pulled out her phone, searched, and then played a sound and asked if that's what it was. It was the exact sound. And that's when I learned that this was not the sound of an animal meeting its end. It was the sound of an animal hoping to make a new beginning. What I had heard was the mating cry of a fox, a sound that a neighbor of ours had heard and told Shannon about, who then told me about it. And I now know that the mating cry of a fox, unless you are a fox, I would assume, is terrifying. I guess it's effective because there are still foxes. But as a lead into romance, it's less of a Barry White midnight storm on the radio, sweet nothings over a nice wine sound, and more of a, uh-oh, I just stumbled across the Texas Chainsaw Massacre guy sound. So the earth animal sound that was terrifying to me was actually one of hope and life and nature doing its thing. I just happened to pass through the area when it happened, but it happens all the time, with and without me, and with and without you. An entire sacred system of life moving, breathing, birthing, and dying with or without us. I happened into its proximity in a new way, which ended up being frightening and then fortunate for me. The author Norman Wurzba might describe that accidental exposure to a depth of earth life previously unknown to me as an experience of agrarian spirit. Wurzba is a professor of theology and ethics at Duke Divinity School and Duke University, who wrote the recent book, Agrarian Spirit, Cultivating Faith, Community, and the Land. Agrarian in this sense means cultivated land. And the idea in his book is to set out some spiritual frameworks and ethical principles for living with postures of gratitude, reciprocity, and service with the land instead of dominance or dominion over it. A great part of that for him and for a number of contemporary Christian eco-ethicists begins with rejecting the human, non-human dualism with which we have viewed creation for such a long time. The claim is that humans are not separate and above creation, but one within creation, or just another expression of it, like the fern, the frog, or the fox. Our gifts of self-realization, of conscience and intelligence only demand more from us in terms of stewardship and the free use of our agency in the earth's interest, but they do not appoint us with the right to destroy or dominate. Wurzba, briefly, but in line with others who make similar claims, believes that when we feel we have a divine right to destroy and dominate the earth, we soon thereafter feel that same right toward different people. Globally, in groups big and small throughout time, the sense of a right to subdue the earth has led to a sense of a right to subdue some of the earth's people. And this has created obvious atrocities, large and small. One of his solutions is to reject the dualism that separates humans from non-humans to begin with, and then perhaps future separations between tribes, groups, parties, and people are less likely to be invented and rationalized. This fits a broader critique of dualistic thinking where mind-body dualism, for example, is thought to elevate one and depreciate the other, which isn't good, especially for those who strongly prefer one over the other. So reject that dualism to begin with and live with the sense that mind and body are one. That way they'll grow together and create within us a posture of depth and balance. Dualistic thinking comes naturally to us. It's easy, for one thing, demands very little discipline, and plays along with our desire to rank and judge, but it's always partial thinking in this approach. It always excludes more than it welcomes, and it always leads to a fragmented life in this divided, contested world. And so as Wurzba pushes back against all that, he identifies practices which are better called postures for living a life that is more integrated with the land, the earth, with creation. One is what he calls descent, or realizing our rootedness to the earth, that we are fundamentally of it. This involves proximity, being closer to the earth, cultivating it as planters do, or at least being outside in its scope and power more often. This would be me stumbling across a fox, doing what foxes naturally do, and receiving senses of place and insight only because I happened to be where I was when I was. We can't actually control the gifts that descent offers, but we can control our proximity to the source of those gifts. So go outside more for longer stretches of time is the practical application of descent. Another practice is humility, which is always a good one, realizing that we're not at the center of creation. Even if story, scripture, and tradition are interpreted to tell us that we are to interpret them differently and tell a better story. Another is generosity, using the gifts we've been afforded to create better cultivation, better stewardship, more mutuality, better eco-ethics. Another is prayer, to connect with something of ultimacy, and especially prayer to grow the spirit within, because if we don't grow within, activism will burn us out each and every time in each and every person. I'm increasingly thinking that prayer and creativity are linked in this way. So if prayer isn't the right practice for you, try committing to something creative over time and seeing if that works. Another practice is what he calls to see, which would be better termed to notice or to become aware. This is what we love about many of the great poets. They simply describe beauty where we would otherwise miss it, and that beauty then creates within us a sense of appreciation and worship. And his last one is hope, the hope of progress, that our choices and actions matter, that we can together live in more meaningful, moral, and mutual relationships with the land, the earth, and one another. Hope builds on the good works of the past by proclaiming a better world to come. And it doesn't work without both of those, what we've done and what we can do. If hope is that which prompts progress, despair is that which precludes it. Nihilism, as understandable and fashionable as it can be, turns people away from possibility, disempowering those who might otherwise find meaning in making a difference. It's an indulgence, a luxury, often of the well-situated, who can afford some removal from the first places and people that nihilism ruins. This calls us to consider how we will cultivate and live an agrarian spirit today. What sort of approach do we take to support eco-stewardship, care of the earth, or enhancing our mutuality? An activist named Alex Steffen encourages us to think in terms of shades of green that favor environmental action and engagement, but they do so in different ways. His first shade is bright green, and it's the one he seems to favor. And it sees innovation and technology as the best path toward environmental sustainability. Green energy, green vehicles, green technology that enhances life while it takes less of a toll on the environment, or sometimes even enhances the environment in its use. And then there are light greens who emphasize lifestyle changes, education, and consumer choices that we can make on the individual level that will add up to creating a more sustainable world. Many of those choices are dependent on the work of the bright greens. And so the idea is that the bright greens make the new technology and the light greens opt for it. And then there are dark greens who want to pull back from most, if not all, consumerism and new technology and create smaller, more self-sufficient kind of communal setups. They tend to not really trust the bright greens because our use of technology has caused today's eco-crisis, and they think the light greens are too incremental to make any real difference. And so the best path is to turn from what has caused environmental destruction as quickly and completely as possible. And while many may lean toward one or the other, we're probably all at least a little of each one. And the real value of this framework is to both know which one we favor and to appreciate that the others exist, for they're all working in their own way against what he calls the grays. The grays are not green, and they deny that there's a problem at all. And so in countering the grays who are powerful and well-connected, we should employ the innovations of the bright greens and the empowerment of the light greens and the commitment of the dark greens with respect and appreciation. As Rumi wrote, there are 1,000 ways to kneel and kiss the ground. There are 1,000 ways to care for the earth. All should be welcome in the larger world of eco-sustainability, especially in the interfaith world, especially by those of us who favor diversity of thought and faith and action. If you walk in a forest at the right time of year, you'll see bright light and dark greens abundant. You'll see more greens than you have words for. You'll see two leaves next to each other on a stem that are slightly different greens. And moreover, you'll see that the brown bark on the branch changes color too. You'll see blossoms that shift slightly in size and hue, and one branch will smell a little sweeter than the one right next to it. It'll all look one way in the rain and another when it's dry, and one way in the sunlight and another under the moon. It'll be a blur if you rush past it, but it'll be miraculous if you really notice it. And the more time you spend in its company, the more incredible it will be. Its life force will seem new and familiar, and you'll see that energy reflected in the birds and bees who engage it, and you'll know it too as a part of who you are. That distance that you feel from it will fade away, never completely, but a little more and more. The proximity will lessen, and you'll know that the idea that the human and non-human world are divorced from one another is just plain silly. As the Bengali poet Rabindranath Tagore wrote, the same stream of life that runs through my veins day and night runs through the world and dances in rhythmic measures. It is the same life that shoots in joy through the dust of the earth in numberless blades of grass and breaks into tumultuous waves of leaves and flowers. It is the same life that is rocked in the ocean cradle of birth and death, in ebb and flow. I feel my limbs are made glorious by the touch of this world of life. All my pride is the life throb of ages dancing in my blood this moment. Tagore helps us remember that no part of creation is separate, and it's that posture, that poetry, that tenet of faith that can guide and prompt our active engagement in eco-stewardship. Not guilt at what we've done, not shame of self or others, not inner or outer attacks, but gratitude for being a part of something so worldly and wonderful can be the basis of how we celebrate Earth Day every day. And from that gratitude, we can mutually, spiritually realize an urgent commitment to build a broad, diverse movement of hope and appreciation that will attract more and more people. Knowing that we are one with the earth and one with one another, this unity has more potential than any strategy of division. So let us be grateful for our different ways of loving the earth and living in its care. Let us deepen in this faith by mindfully placing ourselves in nature's embrace more often. Let us be bright, light, and dark greens as we are moved, just not gray. But also, let us never give up on the gray. Let us reach out with open hand and open heart and know that we too are one and that we too are tied together on earth and evermore. May it be so, and amen. Go forth grateful for the moments before you, the breath within you, the people among you, and the Spirit guiding you toward lives of greater love and kindness. And go forth knowing that you are held always and always with neighbor and stranger by that great love of no beginning and never ending. Go in peace, and amen.